Hey everybody, wake up. This is Wake Up with Mark Joyner, episode number 71. And today we will discuss the takedown of Tony Robbins on Buzzfeed. Okay, before we start this thing, let me add a couple of disclaimers here, all right? Some of this is very important. First off, I have not done a very deep dive of this article yet, nor have I looked at all of the supporting material completely yet. I do not have a full opinion yet at this point. Two, none of what I am about to say should be taken as a defense of anyone who takes advantage of women or victimizes women or abuses women, okay? If that's what you get from what I'm saying, I'm telling you right now, you are not listening to me, okay? That is not my point that I'm trying to make today. Before we dive into this, let me talk first about, I read a very interesting takedown recently of Napoleon Hill. In fact, there are a bunch of people who are spreading around this Napoleon Hill article going, Mark, I see that you quoted Napoleon Hill. Didn't you know that Napoleon Hill was XYZ? And they send me a link to this rather elaborate article saying all of these terrible things about Napoleon Hill. Now, one thing I noticed about this article is that absolutely none of it was substantiated with primary source documentation. Okay, none of it. I didn't see any primary source documentation to back up any of the claims about what was being said about Napoleon Hill. Okay, now, does that mean it's all untrue? I don't know. I have no idea. The article was basically saying that Napoleon Hill, was broke, and there is some evidence to indicate that, he did have some financial ups and downs. It's not unusual, guys. Most of the very successful people I know in business have had extreme swings up and down. I've seen guys have millions to nothing to deep in debt to back in millions again. Okay, it is not unusual. That does not make Napoleon Hill a bad guy if that was in fact the case about him. And I do believe it was true. As I understand it, W. Clement Stone did have to bail Napoleon Hill out later on in Napoleon Hill's life. And W. Clement Stone gave Napoleon Hill a couple of interesting opportunities by doing some co-publishing with him and repopularizing some of his stuff to help Napoleon Hill out in his later years. It sounds like a nice thing for a guy to do who's down on his luck. Does it mean Napoleon Hill was a bad guy because he fell upon tough financial times? No. Does it mean that Napoleon Hill's stuff doesn't work? Not necessarily, right? It's possible that he wrote information that was very valuable and then failed to follow that information, and then, that resulted in his downfall. I can tell you personally, you guys have probably seen me in videos. There's a video of me at an event that a lot of people like to bring up where I have a double chin, where I was quite fat. And this was after I started Simpleology. I built Simpleology, when I was using all of this stuff and doing extremely well. And then I got a little bit lazy because of the success that we were experiencing and, fell deep into making food my drug of choice. I was drinking tons of alcohol. I got fat as a result. I had to get my life back in order. Part of that involved me getting back into using the tools that I created. Okay, so just because somebody creates a tool and they're not a perfect living example of the effectiveness of that tool doesn't mean that the tool doesn't work. That I'm a clear case of that. I'm in splendid shape now. And I will tell you that it is largely due to me following my own advice. When I was not doing well, I was not following my own advice. Okay, people are not perfect. They are not static. They're not unchanging. They're constantly changing. All right? So let's talk about the Tony Robbins thing. My first blush reaction to this Buzzfeed article, first I am not exactly an unbiased observer of Buzzfeed. I am not a fan of Buzzfeed. I see them put out all kinds of salacious stuff all the time that to me largely reads like hit pieces. Okay, what they do is they do what almost all journalism does today, by the way. It's a real shame that we don't have people out there doing the real hard-hitting, honest stuff anymore. What we see a lot of times is people taking information out of context changing the meaning of it because they've taken it out of context, drawing a completely different conclusion from what is supported, by the actual information that's available. Give you a great example of this. If you look at scientific journalism, you hear me probably, gripe about that from time to time. I don't like griping, by the way. I don't think it's the healthiest way to deal with things, but there are certain things going on in the world that we need to point out, that we need to be aware of. We are failing ourselves if we do not point out some of these particular problems. Scientific journalism often is written by people who have no understanding of the actual scientific papers themselves. You can tell what they did most of the time is they just read the abstract of a scientific paper and then draw a conclusion that's not even really supported by the abstract. And often if you read the abstract of a scientific paper, you'll go in and look at the data itself and you'll go, I think this researcher is rather overstating the conclusion that they came up with. And a lot of people are tempted to do this. They're humans as well. There's this phenomenon in scientific inquiry of publish or perish. If you don't publish scientific literature, you are not going to have a life as a scientist. So they have to publish stuff and they have to overblow the importance of their conclusions because they need to have significance in the hierarchy of the society that they belong to. All right, so all of this stuff is just as corruptible as anything else that's run by humans. Now, the journalists, they take these things and they come up with conclusions that are not just not supported in the data, sometimes not even supported by what's written in the abstract, and they write something very, very sensational. Okay, now is that what's going on with Tony Robbins? I kind of get a sense that that's happening a little bit. I listened to one of these clips and they don't show the entire context. So there's a 1-minute video clip there where they blank out the voice of a woman and they label her as the victim. Let's talk about that in a minute. And then they don't show the larger context of what the larger conversation was. Context matters. Context matters. If you take a snippet of a conversation and then you play it by itself, you can probably make anybody look like a monster if you choose to. In fact, I imagine you could probably look back at almost any of my video clips, take out little tiny slices, and slice me up and make me look like a very unreasonable guy, if one were so inclined to do that. This is the way a lot of journalism happens these days. By the way, if you want to see a really good example of this, there is this Israeli blogger who was interviewed by Jim Jeffries. This blogger was very, very clever. He recorded the interview. He set a camera down on a chair, so he got the entire clip of the entire conversation. And then when Jim Jeffries showed the highly edited version of this conversation, this dude later on republished the video of the whole thing so that he could show exactly how disingenuous Jim Jeffries was being. I mean, he literally took stuff totally out of context and had the guy saying stuff that he was not saying at all. And thank God for him, he had the whole thing documented so that he could show the larger context. So what was the larger context of this clip, that we see where Tony Robbins is getting a little bit rough with this woman? I don't know. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. But what I can tell you is this, okay? I have been to a Tony Robbins event before. I went to Unleash the Power Within. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I would never regret having gone to that event. I got an enormous amount of benefit from going there. Okay, were there a couple of things I objected to? Yeah, I didn't like some of the way the sales machinery was working. Okay, I can say that about a lot of self-help organizations. There are a couple that I would name right now that would probably be a bit of a digression where I could say, hey, there's tremendous benefit I got from attending their events, but I don't like the pushy way they sell stuff sometimes. I can separate those things. I can separate it. Am I going to have a real serious problem with Tony Robbins because I didn't like some of the things that he said in his sales pitch? No. I got so much out of that experience, and I have a lot of mutual friends with Tony Robbins. I don't know the guy personally myself, but I know a lot of people who know him very, very well. And I've heard nothing but wonderful things about the guy. I've got nothing but huge benefit from reading his materials, from listening to his lectures, from attending one of his events. Nothing but great benefit from it. The whole thing has been a message of empowerment. And what I took from that little video clip that I saw, he was taking a woman who a lot of people will want to label as a victim. Now, let's get back to that in a second. I keep tagging that, and I want to come back to this word victim. It's very, very important that we unpack this. He was teaching her to not be a victim. I think that's an enormously valuable thing to do, regardless of what the reality was of whatever abuse she experienced, right? I don't know whether she was a legitimate victim of abuse, all right, or whether or not she was in a co-abusive relationship, that happens often, or whether or not she was making it up, right? Now, some people are going to gasp when they say that. How dare you say that a woman might make up an allegation? Never or always believe the victim. This is one of these really interesting statements coming out. I'm sorry, I think that's absolute rubbish. Okay, there's a reason why we have due process in society. It's because people do sometimes lie to get attention and to blame other people or to cause problems for other people. Okay, I can name names of people I've seen do that. I will not do that for the sake of some of these people still being alive. I have personally witnessed that. Okay, people very close to me. That's a real phenomenon. It exists. Again, this is why we have due process in the law. All right, if we just believed everybody who claimed to be a victim, think about what the consequence of that is. That means that anybody has the power to destroy someone's life by saying, that person did this to me, I'm a victim, don't doubt me, because you never doubt the victims. You sure that's the world you want to live in? You sure that's a smart idea? I don't think you're thinking that through if you think that that's the way things should be organized, okay? Due process is a really, really good thing. Now, does the legal system always work out the way we say it should? No. Often the legal system goes to who has the money to pay for the highest lawyer, the best lawyer. That's the reality of the legal system, I'm sorry to say. But still, it's a good thing we at least have the veneer of due process there. Even though the legal system is broken, there's a reason for that system being there when it's functioning at its best, which is not all the time, okay? So let's go, okay, victim. Let's talk about that word, all right? When we say blame the victim, we're making the assumption that that person is a very black and white, victim of a crime. When we hear that word, we think, well, there's a terrible person that did something to this really nice person, and this person over here is the victim, okay? Is it always that simple? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. And when this person has been genuinely abused without any justification for it whatsoever, or without any co-participation on their part, that is a horrible thing. It's an injustice. There's no excuse for that. Absolutely no excuse at all. But when we say you're blaming the victim, we're assuming that we know the entire context surrounding what happened between these two people. And we don't. Sometimes even when we have video, we don't know the entire context of what happens in between people. If you guys remember that whole Covington Catholic school thing, the news media was just beside itself with the white privilege on display by this young man who was standing there, and they edited it and they made it look like the young man went to go confront this Native American man. When in reality, the video clip showed later on that the young student was just standing there with his buddies, and they were all cutting it up the way a bunch of young high school kids would. And then the Native American man approached them banging his drum. The young man didn't move. He simply stood there as the young man after he had approached him, banging his drum. But the way that it was presented to us took out all of that context. All we saw was this little kid, and they made it look like this kid was confronting the Native American man. Now, it turns out, by the way, that the Native American man may have also been a guy who claimed he was a Vietnam veteran, okay, when he actually never went to Vietnam. He said, I'm a Vietnam vet. Well, he later recanted and said, I'm a Vietnam era vet. I was in the military, and I wasn't even in combat arms during the Vietnam era. but there are recordings of the guy saying, I am a Vietnam vet, okay? Now, is the guy a bad guy? I'm not going to say anything about that either, okay? But I'm giving you more context. So what is the reality of Tony Robbins, and what should I do about it? Has the guy behaved imperfectly? I don't know. It's possible. In fact, it's probable. I'm sure the guy has made some mistakes from time to time. Are there any perfect leaders out there who don't make mistakes? This is why even when I'm not a fan of Bill Clinton's politics, but when people were, attacking him because of the Monica Lewinsky thing, I was a little bit more understanding. I was like, well, you got a guy who you give the most powerful position in the world to, and the enormous stress that he's under, is the guy going to misstep a few times here and there? Probably. Okay, does that excuse it? Does it make it okay? No. But I also can understand it. Does it mean that I'm going to judge the guy solely on the merits of that one interaction? Of the fact, whatever one thinks of Bill Clinton, am I going to judge him solely on the merits of his interaction with Monica Lewinsky? No, I'm not going to, because we're all enormously complex. We all have capacity for great good and for great evil. And in fact, almost all of us have expressed it, if we're really honest with ourselves. We have all done terrible things. And we've probably all done pretty great things too. The trick is figuring out how to shift the balance more to doing more positive stuff. And all I can tell you about Tony Robbins is what I have seen of him with my own eyes on the balance has been extremely positive. Okay, now, maybe I need to do a deeper dive in this. Maybe this guy has done some legitimately horrible stuff, and if you guys can show me some evidence that maybe the guy really is a crazy abuser behind the scenes, I want to see that evidence. But let's look at real evidence. Okay, if it's little snippets of things taken out of context, we got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. Okay, and then when we have people coming forward and making all kinds of allegations, we have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt as well. Because I think we've seen, especially in recent years, as the media is getting more and more vicious every day, people often come forth and make allegations, and sometimes it turns out that those allegations were made in bad faith. Sometimes the statements were made in